I've got
Okay.
your bios. So welcome to Empowering Students in the Classroom through Asset-Oriented Language. We've got Marie Lund, who has 4 years of experience teaching undergraduate students at USU in Spanish, the Intensive English Language Institute, and the School of Teacher Education and Leadership, or TEAL. She is beginning her 3rd year as a lecturer in TEAL and currently teaches courses focused on cultural and linguistic diversity. Her background is in second language teaching and Spanish. Dr. Sarah Braden is a linguist and language socialization researcher who has worked in science and language education for over 15 years. Her research explores the socialization of multilingual youth in K-12 science education using applied linguistic and linguistic anthropological methods. Dr. Braden teaches courses in language education to in-service and pre-service teachers seeking the state's English as a second language and dual language immersion teaching endorsements. I'll go ahead and turn the time over to them.
All right. And I'm going to share my screen with you all. One participant can. All right, can you all see my screen now?
Nope.
No? All right,
Oh my
let's try
goodness.
that again. Oh, there we go. Now we're doing it.
Yes, we got it.
Perfect. Oh, I always hate when that. There we go. Okay. So thank you for the introduction, Clarissa. I think you said everything I was going to say to introduce myself. So I'm just going to let Sarah start us off on our presentation.
Yep. All right, so as we think about asset-oriented language in the classroom, we thought it would be useful to kind of take a step back and think about a larger teaching philosophy that this would fit into. And we were so thrilled when we saw the keynote this morning because it's a beautiful setup for everything we wanted to share with you today. So under the frameworks for learning, and there are many different ways that like education scholars theorize about learning. But the frameworks that Marie and I use are sort of from a sociocultural perspective. So we believe that learning is shaped by the context and the type of participation of the learner, that learning is a process of being socialized into or out of a discipline, and that learning is also inextricable from changes in one's own social identity, right? So from this framing, we think of cognition as always, you can advance the slide, it's fine. We think of cognition as always happening, embedded in a social context and inextricable from that context. So we work from this larger teaching philosophy that is a framework for designing instruction that is designed for culturally and linguistically diverse students. However, you know, it works for everybody. So in this larger teaching philosophy, we see the outcome of learning as additive rather than subtractive, as remaining whole rather than framed as broken, as critically enriching strengths rather than replacing deficits. So we imagine and we relate to our students as individuals coming to our classrooms with a wealth of knowledge, and that our job is to connect to that background knowledge, help them to build their knowledge base further, and critically help them to now participate in the professional and disciplinary context that we are trying to help them learn into. So I like this framing of learning, of thinking about it as dynamic cultural dexterity. It's not just knowledge and facts. Those pieces of knowledge enable people to have certain kinds of social relationships in their discipline. Even if you're reading a math textbook alone in your bedroom, somebody wrote that book, right? It's still a social act, okay? So when we think about learning, our students learning, we want to be supporting them in developing this cultural dexterity in our disciplines. All right, next slide. So our last sort of intro point on that note is that it can be helpful to think of ourselves, and this really speaks to what Dr. Villanueva said about the hidden curriculum. We can think of ourselves easily, obviously, as educators. If we're teaching a course, we're an educator. But Fillmore and Snow argue that we are also always these other 4 things, right? So we are also always communicators, evaluators, agents of socialization, and educated human beings. And we want our students to be educated human beings. So as teachers, as educators, we must attend to how we participate with our students in each of these 5 domains of our own sort of teacher or instructional practice, okay? So yes, we are educators, but we are also these other things. So when you think about the hidden curriculum, we want to take those things that could be hidden and make them explicit to ourselves and to our students so that we can create this more inclusive environment that supports their learning. I'll turn it over to Marie.
So, and if we're going to do the full presentation, we'll just keep this in, Sarah.
Yeah.
So what we want to do before we tell you what asset-oriented language means to us and what an asset-based teaching philosophy means to us is we kind of want to know, what does that mean to you? When you hear the term or think of the term asset-oriented language, what does that mean to you? So if you have a cell phone, you can join by text. You can text Marie Lund 612. It doesn't matter if it's caps or lowercase, just no spaces, to the number 37607. Or if you have a computer in front of you, then you can go to pollev.com and it will prompt you to put in Marie Lund 612. You should get a response from your text that you are now joined into a room, and then you can include a word or phrase. This will come up as a word cloud, and so if you have a phrase or a sentence or more than just one word that you're putting in, just leave no spaces with that so it comes up as one unit, one response in the word cloud. But let's try this and see how this works. And I can see we have one response, so hopefully if we can get another response or two. Oh, we got two. All right. Empowerment, project base. There's probably a sentence in here with a response. Cover your assets. Anti-deficit. All right, so we've got some different things that we're thinking about here. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next slide. When Sarah and I brainstormed, what does asset-oriented language mean to us and why do we use it? Why is it an important component of our teaching philosophies? This is what we came up with, was that asset-oriented language is language that values students as humans, focuses on strengths and growth, communicates care and compassion, and exemplifies professionalism. And as we have both employed this asset-oriented language into our classes, we have found all of these benefits to students, that by us being intentional and mindful about the kind of language that we use in our classroom with our students, that we see students begin to take ownership in their learning and make more meaningful connections with material. They practice professional behavior with peers. They communicate effectively with us as the instructors. We've noticed they feel valued and they express that to us. And this also can foster intrinsic motivation. And we all know as instructors that if we can get our students to be intrinsically motivated, that is the biggest win that we can get. So 3 contexts that we will talk about in this presentation, in which Sarah and I are really conscientious and intentional in implying this asset-oriented language, is in the syllabus writing, in teacher talk and instruction, and then communication that we have with students. And here are a few examples that Sarah will share with us about syllabus writing.
Okay, so in our syllabi, we can imagine a typical sort of standard stock language about being absent, right, or being present. Even the idea of focusing on absence instead of focusing on presence, okay. Anyway, so on the left, we have an example. So students absent more than once will be penalized with a decrease of 1% of their final grade for every absence. Instead, in my class, I address attendance in 2 places. So the first place they see it is in my description of in-class assignments. So in class, people do things, right? Well, even if it's a conversation, something that happens on Canvas, some type of workshop, whatever it is that they're doing in class that day, they get credit for it. So grading, I'm going to read some of the highlighted text. Grading is based on participation. Your lowest score will be dropped. So that's me saying, yeah, you might not be here one day and it's not going to impact your grade. You cannot make up these assignments for regular absence. There must be an extenuating circumstance. And then I say, generally, the assignments are worth 1 point, and sometimes there are these 2-point days. And then I added in that it's not about gotcha. Like, I don't look at my attendance and say, oh, there are 5 people absent today, I'm going to make it a 2-point day. I don't do that. It's not to police their behavior. It's mainly the times that it's 2 points, it's because we do some sort of big in-class workshop. And so I just want to validate and value the work that the students put in on that day by giving them an extra point. So yeah, the second place where I deal with attendance then is in the participation. So students are responsible for their own learning. Regular attendance and quality in-class contributions are expected. Attendance will be taken and it impacts your grade through those in-class assignments, right? So there are even further ways that you can make this even more asset-oriented, but this is sort of one step in that direction of trying not to focus on the penalties and try to focus on the behaviors that we want to see and why we want to see them. And then relatedly, the next slide has an example of how I deal with deadlines. So late work will be evaluated at a maximum of 75% of the score earned on the assignment, depending on the assignment, right? So we have some stock language there about the penalties for being late. And instead in my syllabus, I say all coursework should be turned in on time. Weekly assignments on Canvas have strict deadlines. So I tell the students, like, listen, we got this weekly stuff, and I am a stickler about that. You can't make it up unless there's some sort of, extenuating circumstance in a student's life. And in that case, I just create a totally alternative assignment, because the things that they are doing, aside from the reading at home, in class can't be recreated really on an independent level usually. Okay, so I allow flexibility then with the bigger deadlines. So I would always prefer a high quality submission to a perfectly timely submission. And part of that is because I allow and encourage revise and resubmit for all major assignments in my course. So if something's gonna be turned in, I'd rather have them turn it in 2 days late and turn in a high quality product than scramble to get it done on the deadline and then turn in something that they know isn't their best work. So that's part of a larger asset-oriented grading philosophy, which I can talk more about in the Q&A if people have more questions about that. Marie.
All right. So I'm beginning my 3rd year as a lecturer here at Utah State. And in the time between my 1st and 2nd year, I shifted and started to change the language that I was using in my syllabus to focus more on this asset-oriented approach to teaching and teaching philosophy and this asset-oriented language. And I found that as I did this, I was getting more of the results that I wanted with my students. And it was like Dr. Villanueva talked about this morning, it's this hidden curriculum informed language that we use in our syllabi. In that slide that she showed where we have this really dramatic, you'll be penalized for this thing, or there's no exception for this, versus that longer paragraph that says, well, this is the context for why I have this policy, why we don't cheat, why I don't accept plagiarism. Come to me, ask me for help. And so I've switched my syllabi over to use more of this asset-oriented language. So I no longer have in my syllabus I no longer have an itemized list of, I just lost my brain for a second, sorry, of
like
policies,
of
policies for attendance, participation, late work, and those kinds of things. I have it all under one heading that says professionalism. And this is exactly what it says in my syllabus, is practicing professionalism in the context of this course will help to prepare you for your future in teaching. Professionals in the field of teaching are expected to be punctual, participate in group discussions, ask questions or for clarification when expectations or materials are not clear, collaborate with peers, be familiar with current and foundational research practices, respect diverse perspectives, inform the instructor ahead of time when they will miss part or all of a class meeting, proofread final submissions. One of our main goals in class is to become autonomous learners. This class is a sort of apprenticeship in becoming a teacher. Teachers hold a tremendous amount of responsibility. They cannot be late or absent without much planning and preparation ahead of time. They are in charge of developing lessons, and in the case of ESL, I teach courses for the ESL endorsement, designing curricula to meet the needs of very diverse learners. And so as I have noticed the behavior of my students and how that has changed, there was a tangible, visible shift in the behavior of my students, that it went from my first year of teaching, where I had a few overachieving students who would send me an email or keep in contact with me if they were going to miss class or be late or leave early, because they were worried about their grade and they wanted to make sure that they were losing a minimal amount of points for these absences or lost time in class. Versus in my second year of teaching, the majority of my students were contacting me and saying, I had something come up, I can't make it to class, I will fill you in later, or I'm not going to be able to be to class on time, I'm going to be 10 minutes late because this thing happened. And I went from the minority of my class communicating in this way with me to the majority of my class communicating in this way with me. And it was kind of that shift from we're doing this for a grade to we're doing this because we see the value in the class and what's happening. Another connection with our keynote speaker earlier this morning was that we're turning on our learning brain, right? That we are prepared to learn and we're invested in our learning. And students are becoming autonomous learners. So this is another piece that I put in my syllabus. I have a discussion-based class, as many of you may have, and whether we have the majority of classes discussion or a portion of classes discussion, there's this inevitability that our students will interact with each other at some point during our courses. So I've thrown this clause in there also. Our class depends on your informed contributions to succeed. Please prepare carefully for each class, carefully reading materials, preparing assignments, these kinds of things that students should do. You come prepared because it's part of being professional. And this sentence, I think, is one of the most important sentences that I include in my syllabus. It is possible and professional to have a discussion where many perspectives are shared without anyone using language or behavior that is offensive or insulting to those who may or may not be present in our classroom. And I've noticed that as I include this in my syllabus, students understand that we're allowed to have disagreements, we're allowed to have different opinions, but that doesn't change the fact that as we interact with each other, we need to do so in a professional and humane manner. And in any content that you could be teaching, I would imagine that part of our goal is to prepare students for the workforce, to prepare them for success in a professional environment, even in general education courses where students are collaborating with peers, they're learning to meet deadlines, they're developing habits of responding to emails and messages from peers and instructors, and they're developing these professional habits. Even if that course is not directly related to the student's major, they're still developing these professional skills that they will need in the workplace. And so I've found that when I address it in this manner, my students are very willing to comply with this. And my students have moments where they say, I'm frustrated that my norms are being challenged, but I can accept that these differing views exist and are part of the reality that we live in. Back to you, Sarah.
Yeah. Oh, one thing, piggybacking on that, we don't expect that everybody's professionalism clause would look exactly the same, right? So you may not want students to contact you every time that they're going to be absent. You know, whatever your criteria are for success in your community, of your learning community, your classroom or course, it's all about just conveying that to the students explicitly so that they know the rules of the game, and that it's not just the kids who kind of figured out the rules on their own who are able to succeed, that you're making it accessible for everybody. Okay, so this slide, just very briefly, in addition to having our own use of asset-oriented language, we also want to try to have students use asset-oriented language with each other. So Maria and I both use humorous non-examples to kind of illustrate behaviors that we want to avoid in our class, and to then launch into conversations about what behaviors we do want to see. So, I'm in science and STEM ed. So for me, the Big Bang Theory is a great example. Like, no one wants to be a Sheldon, or no one wants to be in a lab group with a Sheldon, if you're familiar with that show, or at least I don't, as a woman and anyway. So the point is to use these humorous non-examples to get your students talking about what behaviors and they want to see in their classrooms, right? So kind of naming some of the stereotypes that might be present, whether it's related to gender, sexuality, race, etc. Having the students kind of have a chuckle about the super extreme versions can then open up the dialogue to say, okay, well, you might not be Sheldon, but are there ways that, you know, we want to make sure that we do behave in this class so that we can create the kind of learning environment and culture that's going to support all of us in this setting? So I do have a paper related to this coming out in like a month. I have to do the proofs. Anyway, but if you would like a copy of it, I'd be happy to share it, and you can ask me about that later or email me. And we did include a link to a really hilarious office example that Marie uses a lot in her class, and it's funny. You should watch it sometime. Anyway, okay, back to Marie.
All right, so just kind of piggybacking on what Sarah said is that we use these non-examples, but the non-examples are not the focus of our discussion, of our lesson, of our class time. We use those to maybe diffuse tension in a controversial topic or to show these gross generalizations and stereotypes that we don't want to perpetuate. But what we have to do is use the non-example to serve as a catalyst for this bigger, greater conversation that we have with students, or for this lesson we're trying to teach. So we introduce relevant non-examples, but focus on appropriate language, appropriate activities. We problem solve. We use critical thinking and critical reflection. So those non-examples serve as a catalyst for this greater conversation that we're having. They don't become the focus because that's funny and entertaining and it helps us to build some kind of superficial rapport with students. We use them for a specific intentional purpose, and we select them carefully to support these greater goals and objectives that we have in our course. And what that does, if we just focus on the non-examples, then we are telling students, don't do this, don't do that, don't do all of these things, but we don't actually set them up for any kind of success. We're not giving them any kind of tools. So by using those non-examples as a catalyst for conversation, a catalyst for growth and discussion, we're actually providing students with opportunities for problem solving in a sheltered environment where the professor is there and they're working with peers who are solving the same kinds of problems. And then we're sending them out into the professional world with tools. They have resources and they have tools and skills to actually problem solve in real time when we are not there as the professor to help guide them. And so the objective is to show them how they can be successful by telling them, yeah, we're not going to do this, but what can we do instead? Now, where do we go from here so that we don't perpetuate these ideas? Another example that Sarah and I have experience with is, this is from an assignment in a class that Sarah and I collaborated on. The culminating project in this course is a community action plan where students create this community action plan to build bridges and to improve and enhance communication and relationships between home, school, and community. We are teaching pre-service and practicing teachers is what we do. So that's why our focus is on school, home, and community. So as we started discussing this community action plan, we started using the language, let's identify the needs in the community so that we can figure out where we need to build these bridges. And we switched as the conversation progressed to this, let's identify funds of knowledge in the community. So let's focus on what's already here. What skills and strengths and resources do we already have in the community that we can use to meet these needs? And so we don't ignore the fact that there are needs. We don't pretend like there is nothing, no deficit, no gap, no hole in these relationships, but we don't make that the focus. We don't focus on what's lacking. We identify what's lacking, but we focus on what is present and how we can use that to decrease what's lacking, to shorten these gaps, and then we build these bridges so that we have students focusing on what's here and how can I use it, and now we're enhancing these relationships that we have within the community. Another example that we have, and probably a question that we all ask a million times, is does anyone have any questions when we're communicating with students in class? And I'm sure we've heard it, maybe we've even heard it today or in other workshops we've done this summer, but it's really not very helpful in encouraging students to ask questions, partially because it's a yes or no question. And I think we've all probably been in situations, because we've been students at some point in time, where we have someone say, does anyone have any questions? And we think, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I don't even know where to start and to begin asking a question. Or there are 2 minutes left at the end of class, everyone is ready and packing up their bags, and the professor says, does anyone have any questions? And no one wants to ask a question in those last 2 minutes because everybody is already packing up and on their way out the door. So if we use more asset-oriented language, we can say, what questions do we have? Or what are our takeaways from today? And what that language does is communicate to students that it's normal and expected that you will have questions. And so rather than saying, does anyone have any questions? We say, what questions do we have? And then we build this relationship with students that they know they should have questions. That's a normal part of learning. Our final example that we're going to share today is email communication with students. And it's probably very normal for us to notice who is absent, missing assignments, have a bunch of zeros as we go through Canvas. But if we take that one step further into this asset-oriented approach or asset-based approach to teaching and this teaching philosophy, we notice these things and then we reach out and we communicate with students and check in to see what kind of support that they need. And so what I have done is created a template here. I do this with my students, and I have noticed that when I send an email out to my students and say, I noticed you weren't here today, that I have students who realize, oh, it means something when I'm not here. She noticed that I wasn't there. So it gives some kind of accountability for students, that they know that it means something when they're not there, and that I notice and that we miss them and that there are things happening. And so I don't have a template that I use because I like for students to know that I'm communicating with them and it's natural and normal and it's not just a robot template. But I created a template to show you, so you could use a template like this in one of your classes. So student name, good afternoon. I noticed that you missed class today. I'm just checking in to see if things are going okay. And I wanted to touch base with you to make sure that you have the support you need to be successful in this course. And I use that phrase with students all semester long. I want to make sure that you have the support you need to be successful in this course so that they know that I'm invested in them. But what I do is I start off with, I'm checking in to make sure that they're okay. And then I give them a reminder. Remember to check Module X, because I have my Canvas course set up in modules, to see what we went over in class today, as well as check in with your class buddy. I assign them class buddies so that if they missed class, they have someone else to check in with before they check in with me. So if they have questions, they need to go and look at the material and then check in with their class buddy. And if they still have questions, then they can come to me. And that helps to build classroom community and also to help them take more responsibility for their own learning. Please reach out to me with any questions. Insert mode of communication here. I totally give my students my cell phone and I say, if you want to get a hold of me immediately, use my cell phone. If it can wait 5 to 12 hours, send me an email. So, and they know that, and that's totally fine with me. Not everyone loves to give the students their cell phone number. So whatever you are comfortable with, do that. And then I hope that all is well and look forward to hearing from you soon. I never say and look forward to seeing you next week, because if something traumatic or terrible or life-changing is happening, I don't want my students to feel the stress and pressure and anxiety of, oh no, now she's expecting me to be there next week, but this terrible thing happened and I can't do that. And so I just say I look forward to hearing from you. And then you can sign or have a TA sign, and I put a TA in there because I teach classes and Sarah teaches classes typically of 35 students or smaller. So we have relatively small courses. Some of you may be teaching larger courses that have over 100 students in them. Or you may have a heavier load where you don't have as much time to be sending out these emails, or maybe you just have TAs because you get TAs. So if you want to share this responsibility with your TAs and have a template you give them, if you notice students have missed class 1 time or 2 times, you set up whatever the parameters fit for your class, for your needs. And then you can have a template for if students miss 2 or 3 or however many consecutive assignments. So your TAs could be looking for these patterns and noticing these things and communicating with your students. And then your TA can let you know if a student is having something big going on in their life that is conflicting with their ability to complete coursework, to attend course, to be successful in your course. So even if you have a large class, I still feel like this is really a realistic thing that you can do, because you can have your TAs help to share in some of this responsibility.
Okay.
And back to you, Sarah.
Yes. We liked this as we have two final thoughts. One is a quote and one is an image. So our final quote is, in order to reach students, we have to know what they know, not just what they don't know. We need to see them and have them see themselves as capable learners who can learn and do anything. And Marie and I just really have felt that this, if you express this care, sometimes I think there's a resistance, like this is too much hand holding. These are adults, I shouldn't have to do this, or things like that. I want to encourage you to like step away from that resistance, try it for a semester and see what happens, because I have seen so much greater intrinsic motivation from students, so much more buy-in, so much more of them putting forth a ton of effort in my courses when I use this type of framing. Okay, Marie. And the last one is this image. Okay, so it's very dramatic leaky pipeline. So we just wanted to leave you with this idea that, you know, if you're in a discipline that has a leaky pipeline, right? So what I mean is women aren't persisting in your field. Students of color are not persisting in your field. Students who identify as LGBTQ are not persisting or are not feeling comfortable in your field, right? We would argue that, you know, using an asset-oriented teaching philosophy more broadly can help to kind of stem this flow and to prevent people from leaving your discipline, right? Expressing care and creating an environment that's inclusive is going to be beneficial for everybody, for you to have more diversity of ideas in your field and for your students to be able to access the careers that interest them. So asset-oriented language is sort of one piece of this larger puzzle. And we're happy to talk more with you in Q&A about language, about other things related to asset-oriented pedagogies. Thank you.
Here's our contact information if you have questions or want to connect with us. And I'm gonna pull the chat up right here. Oh, thank you, Clarissa.
Yes, I answered one question while you were
Yes.
talking, Marie. Sorry, I'm usually not very good at multitasking like that.
I'm never good at multitasking. I just read a book that said the human brain is not capable of actually multitasking.
Yes.
So Gretchen asked, what is our selection process like in selecting non-examples? So for me, I tend to select non-examples. Is that what you answered here, Sarah?
It is, but I only gave my answer, so you should give your answer.
So I like to use pop culture as much as possible. And I find out in the first week or two of class what TV shows, what music artists, what actors, what movies, what podcasts, what books. I like to find out what my students are interested in, what they read, what they consume. And then I try to pull in as many of those examples as possible. But I also have some classics that I love. And so I love to use lots of examples from The Office because they're funny, they have gross generalizations and stereotypes in them, and so they really diffuse that tension of these complicated, complex, controversial topics while they're so absurd and so overly dramatic that it's obvious to see, oh yes, this is a wrong thing, and then I relate it to something real. But I also pull examples that complement my curriculum. And so I teach a cultural and linguistic diversity class, and I tell my students, we're gonna talk about all the isms this semester. Linguicism, racism, classism, heterosexism, all the isms is what I call them. And so I find these examples from pop culture, and these non-examples, I suppose, from pop culture that just really help to illustrate the point that I want to illustrate. I also pull things from the news. And the example, for anyone that attended Dr. Dionga Kanan's presentation on religion this morning, she had an example there about a student who had a religious issue in school. And that's an example that I share in my class every semester. And I say, this is what not to do, but I have to leave you with tools for what you should do. So now we talk about what would we do in this situation? What should we do? What are options? How could we have used, and I use asset-oriented language in my class and teach my students how to use it. And so then I say, what's a more asset-oriented approach that we could have taken to this situation? So things that are relevant and that help support my ultimate objectives in class. That is the selection process. So when I watch TV for an hour or two in the evenings after my kids go to bed, I tell my husband I'm doing research for my class. Yes, so Shireen asked if I can share my syllabus, and I did not want to just throw that out for Travis to put up for everyone in the world to have, but if you are interested in taking a look at my full syllabus, I'm happy to send that to you. So if you email me at marie.lund@usu.edu, I'm happy to share that with you. And all of the examples that we shared are from past and current syllabi that Sarah and I have written and used in our classes. I do not have a systematic way that I pair my students. I ask them in the second or third week of class to either choose a buddy or email me and let me know they want to be assigned a buddy. And so then I pair students up that way. And sometimes I have odd numbers, so I have a group of 3. And that's what I do.
I've got a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if you've noticed any differences between like online language and in-person language when talking about asset-oriented. You had a few examples with, syllabus and then asking, if anyone had questions at the end of a lecture. I'm wondering if you found anything that doesn't translate well to an online format.
I have not, but I find that it's a lot easier to use the asset-oriented language. It's faster and it's more convenient. Using the asset-oriented language is longer. It's like translating English to Spanish. It's like 3 times the length. And so I find that online it feels more tedious and it feels more time consuming because it takes longer. But as we saw in that example that I took a screenshot of that slide that Dr. Villanueva shared with us this morning. But this one right here, I mean, this is our traditional approach to saying we have a 0 tolerance policy, and then this is our hidden curriculum informed. There's a serious difference in writing there. And so I think sometimes online, it can feel a little bit intimidating because students are gonna read 2 lines. Students are less likely to read an entire paragraph. And so sometimes we feel like we need to shorten things so that students will read them. And I would disagree that we need to highlight the important parts and introduce those to students in the first week or 2 of class and maybe remind them throughout, but that entire paragraph that's hidden curriculum informed is so essential to students understanding these policies that I think it's easier to say the whole paragraph in oral language than it is to write it, because now we think, are my students even going to read that, or are they going to gloss over all the words? Sarah, can you think of anything else?
Yeah, what I was going to say is that I actually, because I use Canvas a lot, even though, because I teach web broadcasts. So even though I'm real time with people like we are right now, everybody's all over the state. So I use Canvas a lot for people to write things in, and also just to help be inclusive. Not everybody wants to share verbally, so they can type in, whatever. Anyway, so for me, I actually think that the written form, it's nice because you have more time to respond, right? So maybe something happens in class and you're not quite sure how you want to handle it, or you see an idea and you're like, okay, I'm going to need to follow up on that, but I'm not really, it gives you more time to frame your own responses as well. So I haven't really found that anything doesn't translate well. I think that, but I don't teach anything 100% online. So I think if I did teach 100% online, maybe I would make I know it's more work, but make a video about the syllabus or something. So that's not just that they have to, just read it, but if they hear you talking about it and, hear some of this additional justification for why you're doing the things you're doing, then maybe that would sort of help ensure that they actually get through the whole document. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Gretchen. I think based on Clarissa's initial 5 minutes left, are we out of time?
I think we probably are.
Clarissa,
Pretty
probably.
close, yeah.
So, okay.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you all for coming to our moved session and for staying and for asking questions. And if you have any further questions you'd like to discuss with either of us or both of us, please feel free to just email us. We're happy to share and discuss. We are language people, so we love to talk about stuff all the time. So. Okay. Thank you all, and we will see you in another session.